Well, hey there, and welcome to Wedding Planning Simplified. Happy Sunday. Jacqueline, how are you?
Oh, I am so good. The sun is out. It's officially the first day of spring as of an hour and a half ago. So I am ready for the season.
You just gave me a panic because I always think of the first day of spring as being the 21st, and that's my brother's 40th birthday. So I,
You're
I just,
okay.
I have
You're
one
okay.
day. Okay. Thank you for the
You got
reminder,
one day
though.
to go shopping. You're good.
Amazing. So hi, welcome to Wedding Planning Simplified. I'm Amy and this is Jacqueline, and we are here with you today as we are every Sunday at 1 o'clock to talk about wedding stuff.
Yeah.
So we've been doing a choosing your ... series for the past few weeks. We're trying to keep things fairly organized and hopefully hit you where you're at in your wedding planning. If you are newly engaged, you may have tuned into our venue series in January. Or was that February? It's March already. How is it March?
I don't want to talk about
I
it. Oh.
Anyway, so whatever month it is now, we're doing a Making Choices series. So feel free, as always, to go back in our archives. There are 11 billion videos in there because we do this every Sunday.
May I interrupt with some beautiful looking thumbnails?
Right? I think that the person, like, there has to be a person at Facebook whose entire job it is to go through videos and pick the worst thumbnail.
Yeah.
My
I'm
face
there
like
with
this.
you. That's the one for today.
Exactly. Anyway, train of thought has left the station.
That's okay.
Right.
We're choosing your color palettes today, which should be an easy station to arrive to because it's a fairly common, popular first step is figuring out what your wedding vibe is even going to be.
Absolutely. So we have in the past talked about wedding themes. We've talked about decor. I don't know that we've ever actually just zeroed in on color. So that's what we're going to do today. And the first rule of choosing really anything for your wedding, but especially your color palette, is that there are no wedding police. So I say that all the time. There's no right or wrong. It's your wedding. In most cases, as long as what you're doing is safe and legal, you just go right ahead and never mind what anybody else thinks. That being said, there are a few things that you might want to think about when you are choosing your colors. For some people, it's really easy. For some people, it's a struggle. I know when I was getting married, my husband very sort of dejectedly said, all right, fine, you can do fuchsia with black and white, which I think if I were doing it now, I would definitely do differently. But he said, you can do it as long as I don't have to wear any pink. So, I mean, it's all about compromises and
Most
priorities.
of the time, the partner is able to set their own boundaries with colors. I know for myself, I had this perfect color scheme in mind. And then when I said it to my partner, he went, oh, but I want to wear navy. And that did not fit in my mind. I couldn't even picture it. And I was like, well, this threw a wrench in things. I didn't even consider what you'd want.
Right. And so we'll talk about how to find that middle ground a little bit today. And if you want to talk about priorities, view our video from last week.
Exactly.
All right. So let's jump in here. I'm not going to make this too high school art classy, but there are a couple of terms that you need to know. Presumably, you all remember your primary and secondary colors, and then your tertiary colors, which are even farther blends of those. There are some terms that you'll probably come across, such as hue, which is basically synonymous with color. Saturation, I'll talk about today. So that's one that you'll want to understand. And it basically just means how strong or how weak a color appears. Tone, we're not going to talk about that today. And shades are the opposite. Tones and shades and tints are when you add white or black to colors to kind of adjust their appearance. So we're not going to talk too much about that. But we will touch on some color schemes that are pretty tried and true, and all of which can work depending on the situation. So monochromatic color schemes have been pretty popular as of late, which basically just means you take one basic color and you vary the tones, shades, and tints within that same color. You could also look at doing an analogous color scheme, which takes that color wheel and chooses 3 colors that are side by side. It can be challenging depending on the saturation of the colors that you're choosing, and we'll show you more about that a little bit later. And complementary, which is maybe the trickiest color scheme to do well, because it's when you take two completely opposite hues from the color wheel and you use those, but it can be kind of jarring. Think Christmas, red and green, depending on the tones and the shades and the saturation of the color that you choose. So complementary color schemes can be really, really beautiful. You just have to be careful. Approach them with caution.
And these are always things that you not necessarily want to touch base early on with your photographer, but definitely something to consider when you're looking for photography. If you really want those complementary tones to stand out, choosing a photographer that puts a tan and grainy filter on their photos or does the editing so that way it really enhances the vibrancy and the brightness might not translate well in your photo gallery.
Photography is absolutely something to consider when you're choosing your color scheme. There are certain colors that just don't photograph well, and there are certain colors, like green, for instance, depending on the shade, that can really not play nicely with a lot of skin tones. So thinking about that as you're choosing your color scheme is important too. And then the last color scheme is called a triadic color scheme, and that's when you choose 3 evenly spaced colors. So analogous is 3 colors side by side, and triadic is 3 colors that are evenly spaced on the color wheel. So to give you some visual examples, because I'm a pretty visual person, here's an example of a monochromatic palette. You can see that it kind of takes that orange, yellow, and adds some different tones and shades in there. Can be a lovely color palette, and it's, like I said, very common these days. I'm seeing a lot of blue color palettes and a lot of green color palettes that are pretty monochromatic. The analogous color palette can be kind of tricky depending on the saturation of the colors that you choose. So this one uses a royal blue and a royal purple, which are 2 colors that personally I find challenging to use together, but it's totally acceptable. And I've done weddings that are blue and purple using these exact colors, and it came from a blending of the bride and the groom perspective. So she wanted the purple, and his favorite color was the blue, and we made it work. Certain side-by-side colors are easier to use, though, than others. Blue and purple might be a challenging one, depending, again, on the saturation of the colors that you choose. The complementary, the tricky color palette with those opposite colors. This one uses more of a sort of like a persimmon color as opposed to like a Christmas cherry red, and then a sagey kind of celadon green. Celadon? How do you say that word? I don't know.
However you say it, just say it confidently and I'll believe you.
Right. So it's the red and green, but because of the tones that they've used here, it's less Christmassy. It's not like Santa's going to show up at your wedding here.
Unless that's your choice.
Depending on your theme. And then a modified triadic. So this uses 3 of those evenly spaced colors. You've got the red, the yellow, and the purple. Now, you probably have some sense of the difference between warm versus cool colors. Your warm colors are the colors that make you think of fire, red, orange, yellow, and then the cool colors make you think of water. So your blues, your greens, your purples. And I mean, palettes using all warm colors can work really, really well. Often we see that in winter weddings. Cool colors can work really well, or you can certainly mix them together. Similar saturations in the colors that you're using are pretty common. So if you use deep saturations, you're going to get a more vibrant look. And if you want a more muted look, use less saturated colors. And then if you're combining warm and cool colors, you're going to create some depth, but you're going to want to play with tones and shades and tints so that you don't get that really jarring high contrast look. And I'll give you some examples of that in a little bit. So here's a beautiful warm color palette using those nice cinnamon colors with some neutrals thrown in. A cool color palette of blues and greens would be lovely in the summer, or if you're having a beachy kind of wedding, outdoor wedding. And all of this high school art lesson boils down to so what, which I don't know about you, but I said that a lot in high school. So
what's this for?
So
what?
Yeah,
or
why?
It's either so what, or is this going to be on a test? That was one of my favorite sentences.
Am I getting marked on this?
Is this graded?
Exactly. So you don't have to know any color scheme, any color theory when you're selecting colors for your wedding. Like I said, there are no color police, but there are some things that are going to probably work a little bit better for you and some things to stay away from. So generally speaking, I like to start with some kind of inspiration, whether it's a piece of art, whether it's my favorite season, whether it's a place or a photo. And there's this really cool app, actually. It's called Adobe Capture, and you can take a photo and it will draw a color scheme from it. And then you can kind of play with that. There's also a cool website called Colors, which is spelled wrong. It's COOLORS.co. And that's where you can put together different color schemes. You can look at people's favorites and you can hopefully maybe get some inspiration from there. Our friend is Pinterest. Our enemy is Pinterest. Our friend is Pinterest. So, I mean, certainly scrolling through Pinterest is very inspiring. Just, be cautious. Take everything with a grain of salt on Pinterest. Consider whether it's a real wedding or whether it's a styled shoot where they spent $1 million on one table because they didn't have to decorate 25 tables. But that's another story for another day.
We'll go into a full vent session on Pinterest one day, I'm sure.
It's true. We should just have a Pinterest beware. We'll do a day on that.
Yes.
I mean, you can also just go into a paint store and pull a bunch of paint chips and see what appeals to you. I would always suggest that you choose a neutral to ground everything. And so we're seeing these days actually less black as a neutral, although I will forever exclusively wear black and I love black in all things. But we're seeing a lot of navies as neutrals or tans as neutrals, and gray has been really popular over the past few years. I'm seeing it kind of swing back towards tans though lately. Maybe it's the boho thing. Gray tends to be a little bit more of a cooler kind of a color, whereas tan is a little bit warmer. So depending on the other colors you're using, you can choose your neutral accordingly. But I think it's nice to have that neutral to kind of ground everything so that it doesn't get too busy and too overwhelming. You will want to choose one, maybe two focal colors, and then find one or two complementary colors. Now, this can very quickly get rainbow-ish if you're choosing very vibrant colors. So we want to be cautious about that.
My mind just went to the table. My mind just went right to the table where I'm picturing a blue table linen with a yellow napkin and then gold cutlery and a green cup, because those are just my touches. What do you mean?
Right. So I would suggest that less is usually more. If you wanted to do blue and yellow, which are they're opposite each other on the color wheel. They're very contrasting and can be jarring. I would suggest that you do it in a more subtle way. Like maybe you're going to have your blue as a navy, which can also be your neutral. And then you bring in a nice soft yellow that's not going to be too bright and contrasting against that blue. So there are definitely ways to do things that are more subtle and a little bit less romper room or high school prom. Where metallics are concerned, we are still seeing lots of mixed metals. Traditionally, you would choose one metallic, whether gold or silver. I would just say if you are using mixed metals, do it intentionally. So don't have 90% of your metals, whether it's in, flatware on your table or whether it's in picture frames or whether it's in, wraps on your boutonnieres. Don't have 90% of your metals gold and then throw in something silver just because it's all you could find at the last minute. If you're going to do mixed metals, you want to make sure that it's intentional and balanced so that you have equal amounts of both metals, ideally. And generally, color schemes that have similar saturations or tones, shades, and tints are often the most pleasing. That avoids that really jarring, like, this is the brightest yellow ever against the brightest blue ever. So generally, that's where the jewel tone kind of color theme comes in, where it's rich saturations of often analogous colors, but because they're so rich and saturated, they play nicely together. Or Conversely, that's where the boho color theme comes in. That's where everything is kind of neutral, and because it's similar saturations, it plays well together. So that kind of brings us into what's trending. And Jacqueline and I were talking offline a little bit about trends. And here in London, Ontario, we are a little slow. We come to the game a little bit late on most things. If you want to be super trendy, I would suggest that you follow some LA wedding planners. Maybe check out what's happening south of the border, maybe check out what's happening in Europe. And then 3 or 4 or 5 years later, it'll make its way to London, Ontario. So, I mean, I think that the word trend is a little bit of a slippery slope, because ultimately...
I also personally, in my opinion, sorry to interrupt you,
No, of
don't
course.
think your wedding should be trendy. Your wedding is typically what you want to be the most timeless, because that is what you're going to reflect on most throughout your marriage. Of course, you're going to have a billion happy memories between your wedding day and the day that you're no longer together, whether that's... I'm not going to get there. But you want to make sure that you're not looking back thinking, oh, well, I'm so thankful that I used trending colors, because that's not what you're going to think of when you look back.
Yeah, I mean, as much as you don't want your wedding to blend in with the other 15 of your friends who are also getting married in 2022, because all of the people are getting married in 2022. I mean, you don't want your wedding to look the same as everybody else, but you also don't want it to not be reflective of you as a couple. And I just said a lot of nots in a sentence there, but it should be reflective of you and your partner and your likes and your interests. And it shouldn't be something that you choose just because it's trendy, because those are often the weddings that you are going to look back on and shudder at, you know, the style of the bridesmaids' dresses and the color of the flowers. So pick something.
If there's one thing that gets my mom shuddering more than most, it's talking about the wedding hats that were trending when she got married, and she hates wearing hats, but she wore one on her wedding day and she despises those photos.
Right? So I would always say be true to you instead of be true to the trends, because I think that's going to stand the test of time a little bit. You know, if when you are a grandmother and you are wearing your soft blue sweater and you're showing your photo album of your wedding to your grandchildren and it's soft blue, I mean, obviously that's something that is special to you and has stood the test of time.
Exactly.
That being said, there are some things that are trending and we're seeing a lot of. As usual, Pantone tries to influence what happens in a year by choosing their color of the year. This year, they've chosen Very Peri, which is this sort of periwinkle bluey purple color. It's a beautiful color. I think their reason for choosing it was because they wanted to choose a more calm, serene color as a sort of response to the 2 years of chaos that we've survived. So it is that. It is a very calming, cool color that works well in monochromatic color schemes, as you're looking at these two lovely mood boards here. Those purples and blues are very pretty and very serene, and it gives you that kind of overall look. Just be cautious when you are doing blues of any kind for your wedding that there are only a handful of flowers that naturally come in blue. So if you're looking at a lot of blue bouquets or centerpieces, just be aware that oftentimes you will be looking at artificial flowers, because there are very few naturally blue flowers. We're seeing a lot of slate blue, and that again is something that's been around for a couple of years. It kind of showed up in our neck of the woods 2 or 3 years ago, just before COVID hit. And it's still around, and there's nothing wrong with choosing something that's been around for a couple of years, because it's something that a lot of people are doing, and likely then something that you're going to be able to source out from rental suppliers if you are looking for linens, for example. That's something to consider too. If you're right on the cutting edge of the newest trending fabrics and colors, do your rental suppliers have those yet, or are they going to be a little slow to that game? So blues are something that pair well with either black or navy or tan or gray as a complementary color. So you have a lot of flexibility. You also have a ton of options in terms of saturations. So those lighter slate or dusty blues work really well in the summer. You might go for a more saturated navy blue and go more into those jewel tones in the winter, although there's nothing saying that you have to do pastels in the summer and jewel tones in the winter by any means. The thing that I would suggest is that you can easily shake up blues with a complementary color. So this example here is blues and reds. Just be cautious with any complementary color that you choose saturations of the color that play well together. So we've got in this one that I just brought up here, you've got a really rich kind of Merlot red against a light slate blue, which works really well together. There is definitely contrast, but it's not a screaming like royal blue versus cherry red, which is going to give you a very sort of loud overall
Fourth
feel
of
to your wedding.
July almost feeling.
Right? And those are things you'll want to think about. I mean, if a color scheme has a connotation like red and yellow, for instance, like your wedding has not been sponsored by McDonald's, we hope. Or red and green, those Christmas colors, or, orange and brown. It can work really well if you choose lovely, like rusty oranges and you maybe pair it with a nice deep red. It can be a beautiful fall color scheme, but it also kind of makes me think of the grocery store where I shopped when I was really, really young. It was brown and orange were their colors, and it just reminds me of Nectal's grocery store.
So for that reason alone,
just think about people's connotations with different color schemes. Now, greenery, this is not new. It's been around for 5-6 years now because someone somewhere on Pinterest came up with a greenery table runner and everybody thought, oh, that looks inexpensive. It's not.
She ain't.
Yeah, right. But it's not going anywhere. Greenery is natural. It's beautiful. It lends itself to pairing with either a warm color palette or a cool color palette. Green is one of those flexible colors that, depending on the undertones, could go either way. And like I just mentioned on the last slide, you can certainly choose softer saturations for summer and more vibrant for winter. We're seeing a lot of forest green, especially in forest green velvets, have been popular for winter weddings lately. And I personally can't pull that look off, but I love it on other people. So be mindful of the skin tones of your wedding party if you are choosing to put them in greens for sure. And then we've all seen the boho look that is, again, popular, has been for a couple of years. We're seeing those beautiful pampas grass centerpieces and natural dried elements in flowers. And that lends itself to soft nudes and tans and pinks and light coral colors. And it's a beautiful monochromatic color scheme you can see on these slides here. It's been paired with some green, some nice sage, soft sage greens. And I don't think that color palette is going anywhere either. Just be cautious when you're choosing any color palette of the season that you're getting married. I would say if you're going with a lot of creams and whites and light tans, and then you're going to have all of your photos done outside in the winter, just keep in mind how much of a wash that photo is going to look like if there's not any contrast with the background. Or if you're choosing those nice soft greens and then you're planning on having all of your photos done in the forest, keep in mind that the colors in the background are going to blend dramatically with your attire.
Yeah, it may not be a camouflage dress, but it could be after your photos.
And one of the leading reasons why I'm happy that I'm a wedding planner in London, not where I grew up in the backwoods, because camo is definitely a thing back in Teeswater. Hey there, yeah. Teeswater. Love you. No offense.
But there's no camo on this slideshow.
No camo on this slideshow. Now, when it comes to figuring out how to make both partners happy, welcome to marriage. It's all about compromise and listening to your partner and figuring out how to get what you want and make them think they're getting what they want.
And as we joked,
I didn't
your
say
partner
that.
may want camo. So you may have to figure out how to make maybe not the camo pattern work, but how to integrate the camouflage colors to appease your partner.
It's true. And I've seen lots and lots of ways of blending interests and blending color palettes and incorporating both partners. And that's one of the reasons why I love what I do, because I get a chance to figure out how to showcase the individual personalities of both of you. And some of that goes down to theme, and some of it goes down to specific decor touches. But when we're talking specifically just about color, I would suggest that you and your partner both make lists of your favorite colors, your favorite activities, places you've traveled together, art, attire. Like I said, inspiration can come from anywhere, but I think that that will hopefully help you to focus in on the colors that you both individually like, and then you can compare lists and find colors that play well together that are representative of both of you. I would suggest that you try to use one color. Maybe you can get away with using two colors as dominant colors, and maybe you choose to use the other as an accent. So in the, I don't know if you can see my cursor. You probably can't. Oh, you can.
We can.
In the navy and marsala color palette here, those are two fairly dominant colors that have both been used in similar saturations. So that's that sort of jewel tone thing. And I think if blue is a color that one of you loves and red is a color that another one loves, this is a really classy way to incorporate both of those colors. And they're both kind of playing equal roles here, as opposed to one being dominant and the other one being less so. And this works because they are similar saturations, but the undertones play well together, instead of choosing like a really, really, really bright red and then a really, really bright blue that is going to look a little bit juvenile and a little too primary. These colors are moderated with by tone and by saturation, so that they look beautiful and classy as opposed to kindergarten-y.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unless you're sponsored by Crayola, we don't need crayon boxes.
Right. And this is one of those triadic color schemes using primary colors that would definitely be reminiscent of a primary school. So, you know, if you are a kindergarten teacher and you want to bring that into your wedding, by all means, use blue and red and yellow. But I would suggest that moderating those colors can produce a really beautiful effect, instead of using their kind of, you know, naked forms, those true primary colors. Regardless of the colors you choose, I think that staying consistent is always an important thing. So trying to keep the same tone of a color, as opposed to just choosing randomly a burgundy and a merlot and a cinnamon, which are close but not exact. And then repeating your colors throughout your decor and stationery. If you do things 3 or more times, it's going to look intentional. If you do it once, it's going to look accidental. So trying to be consistent and to carry those colors through for a cohesive look. We've talked about using similar saturations like the navy and marsala here, or one saturated hue and the other one neutral if they're complementary colors. So like a nice neutral sage green can play really well with a red, as long as you sort of mute that red a little bit as well. Maybe you darken it up a little bit and you create a darker toned red than that bright cherry red. I would suggest these 3 pictures on the far right would fall perhaps into the category of don't. I would avoid, if possible, using 2 really highly saturated colors that are complementary. So that's your Christmas look. That's your red and green, or that's your middle picture here, blue and yellow, where it's really, really, really dramatic in contrast. And I mean, if you are a dramatic person, I am not telling you not to do it. I'm just saying that it's hard to make it work. Don't do anything reminiscent of prom or reminiscent of, you know, your high school graduation or whatever it was. Generally speaking, if it was the colors of your high school mascot, maybe stay away from it.
That's just a good written rule for most in life.
Yeah, it's true. So, I mean, lime green and royal purple in this top picture here, they're both very, very vibrant and they're dramatically different. And it's hard to make those colors work well together. Whereas if you did like an eggplant and a sage and softened those both down a little bit, it would work quite well together. Similarly, at my bottom picture here, the turquoise and royal purple. I have nothing against royal purple. Well, I guess I maybe do. I don't love royal purple, to be honest with you. I would much rather a nice aubergine or a lilac or a mauve than a true royal purple. But it's tough when you're working with two colors that are so bright like that. When the tint is light and bright and forward, it's really hard to make those colors work well together. So this turquoise and royal blue, again, if you were to tone those down, maybe add some black or gray into those colors and reduce the tone, I think it could work really well together. Or if you wanted to just use the turquoise and use a softer neutral like a gray, it could work quite nicely. But I think the contrast here is a little bit jarring for most people.
We're all for working smarter, not harder. So if you're already noticing, oh, I've picked two really hard colors to make go together, don't make it hard on yourself. Find a way to make it a little bit easier to source, as Amy said, because finding those bright and vibrant colors that rental agencies will have, that rentals companies will be comfortable saying, yeah, that'll look good, might be few and far in between.
Very, very true. So, I mean, ultimately, as we bring this to a close, there are no wedding police. Nobody in their right mind who is invited to your wedding, hopefully, is ever going to come up to you and critique your choices, because ultimately you've probably chosen colors that mean something to you. But I would suggest, there we go. I would suggest trying to follow some of the things we've talked about here, keeping in mind, trying to find ways to blend both yours and your partner's colors together with things that are easily accessible at rental shops for both linens and for suits or tuxes. If there are guys in your wedding, if there are females in your wedding, you'll want to think about what is currently available at gown shops, because colors do cycle through. And if you are dead set on having lime green as your bridesmaid's dress color, you may have a difficult time finding that in gown shops. So as always, we are here to help. You can find us at unmistakably.you.com. You can email me, amy@unmistakably.you.com. You can put a comment after this video and we will respond if you have questions, or if you want to show off the color scheme for your wedding. We love it when people show us what they're doing. And just as a final little plug here, we are just gearing up for something that is going to be incredibly helpful for you in making your wedding choices, and that is the Old East Wedding Market. So that is coming very soon at the end of April, the 28th, 29th, and May 1st. And it is a different kind of wedding experience. It's not your standard wedding show. It is going to be interactive and experiential and funky and fun. And we encourage you to hit us up at oldeastweddingmarket.com to buy your tickets before they sell out.
Very true. And it's also a great place for you to potentially see colors of dresses and suits, because we have some amazing participants who will be offering you a chance to try on dresses and a chance for you to try on suits as well. So if you don't know what colors you want to go with, that could be a great chance for you to see what skin tones look good in which colors.
Absolutely. And Jacqueline just posted the link in there for tickets, so feel free to click there, get some tickets. Sorry for the shameless plug, but I'm not sorry. Hope to see you there.
No.
We will see you here again next week, Sunday at 1 o'clock, and we hope to meet you face-to-face at the Old East Market. So have an amazing rest of your weekend. Jacqueline, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
No problem. Thank you for filling me in for colors. I've got a lot to think of with Alex tonight.
Good luck with that.
Take
care, everybody.